to share his knowledge on impact of blockchain on diverse domain. As you know very well that Gorandas Vaishnav College is a 60 years old institution with the A++ grade, and in NIRF we are within 100 to 150 within a short span of time. Always we used to update the knowledge of faculty members by conducting various programs for the students, for the faculty members. Like that, today the inauguration of PG Department of Information Technology and BCA is inaugurating a week-long faculty development program in various topics. And various experts are going to deliver their expertise on various fields to the faculty members. You know very well that the field of computer science is not static. It is a dynamic. We need to take any language, any subjects, even if you take a basic science, whether it is physics, chemistry, or mathematics, the same content will be delivered to the undergraduate students and PG students. But in computer science, we could not do like that. We have to see the latest trend and the latest technology, and we have to teach the students. Before going to approach the students, the most important thing is the faculty themselves have to update themselves. For update from faculty knowledge, we are conducting this faculty development program from Vaishnav College. I'm very happy to note that Dr. Angayar Kanni and his team have putting their full effort in conducting this program. And also I understand more than 163 participants have logged in till time today. Due to that, they are also going to benefit by the lectures given by the speaker on impact of blockchain and diverse domains. I don't want to take much time of you. I can say one thing is updation is need of the hour, especially for the computer science faculty. Not only they should have an update on the languages, updation, they should have updation on technology. They should have an updation of applications. Our field is like a poet. If the poet want to recitate any poem, they can select any topic. They will select nature, they will talk about anything. Like that, we, the computer science professors, should know about all the domain. You should have a knowledge on accounting, you should have a knowledge on technology, you should have a knowledge on mechanical, you should have a knowledge on electrical. Everything is necessary for the present computer science faculty. So keeping in this mind only, we are conducting this international seminar for the International Faculty Development Program for you. Thank you very much for participating in. Really, I think you will enjoy a week with various content. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your words of wisdom. I am absolutely delighted to present the shining star of blockchain firmament, our resource person, Executive Director, the Government Blockchain Association, United States of America, Mr. Gerard Dache. He is a co-leader of United Nations Internet Governance Forum, Blockchain Association and Standardization Dynamic Coalition. He founded a government blockchain association in 2017. Today, it has thousands of public and private sectors working to use blockchain and other innovative technology to solve many challenges. He has started over 50 working groups. They worked with government and industry leaders throughout the world. He is one of the founding architects of the blockchain maturity model, the global standard for the blockchain solutions. I'd like to hand over the session to you, sir. Over to you, Mr. Dache.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, sir. Sir, can we see your, can you turn on your camera, sir, please?
Sure. Absolutely. Happy to do that. I might turn it off. I might turn it off briefly if we have any issues with bandwidth. So if you have any difficulty hearing my audio, please let me know and I'll go ahead and turn it off. So can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can see.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not sure about this technology. If I have video with audio, will you be able to hear the audio as well? Do we know?
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. Well, my name is Gerard Dache. I am the Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association. And so I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me. I consider this a tremendous honor and privilege. I will say this one thing about me, and I encourage the professors to keep this in mind as they're interacting with their students. It took me 7 years to go through a 4-year degree. At the time, I was working 5 jobs. My father died when I was 16, and my mom had a nervous breakdown. So I was one of these kids that was not academically excelling at the time. But since then, I've had the opportunity to teach at Georgetown University, at the United Nations, on Capitol Hill. And so if you have students that might be struggling a little bit, just realize one day they may overcome those struggles. And if we can ask people to maybe turn off their audio, that would be great.
Participants, you ensure that your audio on mute.
And you mute it.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'd like to give you a little bit of agenda in terms of what to expect. By the way, let me just sort of set time limit expectations. My expectation is to talk for about an hour, but I want to make sure that I'm sensitive to your schedule and I don't go into the next speaker's time. So I have 40 minutes after the hour. What time should I limit my talk to? Just to make sure that you stay on schedule.
40 minutes.
So 45 minutes or not is enough, sir. That's will be more than enough. Thank you, sir.
Okay. 45 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so that'll take me to about 15 minutes after.
No, sir.
Okay.
If you are willing to take, we are ready, sir. We are ready to hear.
Okay, well,
Yeah, ready?
there's
1 hour.
a lot of information. I could talk for 8 hours, so I'll try to keep it brief. Again, I want to be respectful to the other speakers. So let's talk a little bit about what the history of blockchain is, because I really do believe that in order to be able to understand the future, you need to understand the past, and you need to understand the drivers of what was it that caused us to get here, and then understanding how those drivers take us into the future. So I think the history of blockchain is very important. And then let's talk a little bit about what a blockchain is, because to understand how it works in diverse domains, it's important to understand what it is and how it works. Then I'd like to provide some resources for the faculty and staff for them to be able to continue their learning, and then looking ahead, any kind of questions that people might have. So that's the basic agenda that I plan. Okay. It's important to understand that while a lot of people think of blockchain and Bitcoin and it's starting in 2008, it really started prior to that. And it started when we started developing these networks. This thing prior to the internet, right? All of a sudden we have these networks that we were creating inside companies that were becoming local area networks, and then wide area networks, and then this thing called the internet started to appear. And so people's computers were going to start to connect with other people's computers. And David Chaum wrote a piece in 1982, his dissertation on computer systems established, maintained, and trusted by mutually suspicious groups, because people didn't feel very comfortable connecting their computers to somebody else's computers. And then in 1991, Stuart Haber and Scott Sternetta, they created the very first operational blockchain, and here's why they did it. The reason they did it is because as Scott Sternetta saw that we were moving towards the internet, and he recognized that an electronic record can be changed and nobody would know the difference. He said, what would it be like to live in a world where we couldn't trust our records? And so he started working on this problem. And they just couldn't come up with a solution, because if I was going to have a transaction with somebody else, we would need a third party to validate that transaction. But I could collude with that third party, and so we would need a fourth person to validate the transaction. But the three of us could collude together, so we would need a fifth party, and then a sixth, and a seventh, and the problem just expanded infinitely. And that's when it struck him that the problem was actually the solution. And he said, when enough people are involved in the collusion, it's no longer collusion, it's consensus. And that's when they came up with the concept of, I could have a transaction between me and another person, and if it was witnessed by a community, then that community could validate the transaction. And let me tell you why that was so important. Because at the time, this was before 2008, right? So they wrote that paper in 2008. Here's what was going on in the world. It was a great lack of trust. We had the banking and financial crisis, the global financial crisis, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, the subprime mortgage crisis, right? The European debt crisis, and the governments responded with these financial institutions were too big to fail. And so the governments decided to do this big bailout, which caused a huge backlash. And we had movements like Occupy Wall Street. All over the world, there was a great amount of distrust that the governments were colluding with the banks, that these powerful authorities were essentially taking advantage of everyday people. And it was in that environment, right? And how do we know it was in that environment? Because if you look at the very first block in the Bitcoin blockchain, it has a headline from the Times of London about the bailout of the banks. So we know that this was connected to the first major blockchain, which was Bitcoin. So Stuart Haber Scott Sternett and Stuart Haber put the first blockchain in production in 1991, but it wasn't until 2008 in this crisis of trust where the Bitcoin blockchain took off. And so a white paper emerged. It was under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. And here's what we know. There are 8 references in that white paper. 3 of those 8 references belong to the work that Stuart and Scott did, right? And what they did was they came up, they took the blockchain concept, they added a token called Bitcoin, and that's where it started from. And like I said, at the time, there was a tremendous distrust of powerful institutions. Here in the United States, we had a bank, Wells Fargo. They had 5,300 fake accounts. There was this constant fear and distrust of government. There are global surveys that talk about the level of distrust in government declining over the years. And it was in that environment from 2008 forward, right, that we had this sweeping populist movement, which is what led to the elections of Donald Trump here in the United States and Bernie Sanders. Very, very different political figures, both of them having a very similar message, an outside of the establishment message, a for the people message, right? And again, very different parties, but very consistent themes. And it's the same thing that came with Brexit, right? It was this concept of almost like a libertarian throwing off the chains of authority. And it was in this environment that Bitcoin started to grow. And so the first Bitcoin transaction happened on May 22nd of 2009. It was 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 pizzas. And little by little after that, we started to see other people start to accept Bitcoin. And initially it was in a very sort of small niche area, but little by little we saw it started to grow. And then today, Bitcoin was just at first, but today there's literally thousands of different cryptocurrencies, right? And so people might have heard of a couple, but there are literally thousands. Anybody with about 9 lines of code can create their own cryptocurrency. And out of that, an entire ecosystem started to develop. people started writing software applications, associations like the Government Blockchain Association started to form, exchanges, financial services, news and data, all kinds of different companies started to come together to focus on this new industry or domain. And it's a lot like the internet, right? When the internet first started, nobody was really using the internet until the concept of email started to happen. And once email started to happen, then everybody needed an internet provider. And once everybody had an internet provider, they could have a web page. And then before you know it, we had online banking and shopping and all of those things. But it was email was the killer app for the internet. Cryptocurrency was the killer app for blockchain. And then here's another thing that we started to see. If cryptocurrency was the killer app for blockchain, right? In 2009, right, $1 could have, if you had $1, you could have bought $1 worth of Bitcoin. But by the time you hit to 2019, that $1 had decreased in value to 85 cents. And that $1 worth of Bitcoin increased its value to over $4 million. And why is that? The reason is, and we saw this happen with the pandemic, that governments do not have an ability to control spending. And Bitcoin has a limited quantity of tokens. There's only going to be 21 million tokens ever, right? And so just based on the economics, the value of Bitcoin started to rise. Now, there's all kinds of other things that have happened. I wish I had time to peel the onion back and give you all the detail, but there was something about the fact that it was a limited quantity compared to national governments that could print as much money as they want. When the pandemic hit, and I can just give you this example from the United States. When the pandemic hit, we had $4 billion in circulation. We sent everybody home, but we still had to pay people. So, and it's not like we had piles of money sitting around in closets. So they just printed money, and so in 1 year we printed so much money. We went from a circulation of $4 billion to $4 trillion. Excuse me, $4 trillion. 1 year later, we had printed an additional $14 trillion on top of that, which is what cost, which is essentially what has started the inflation. And so these kind of factors, when people are looking at this, there's all kinds of factors which lead to the deriving of demand in the cryptocurrency space. So this was the 1991 to 2008. Then in 2010, we talked about Bitcoin. Actually, it was 2010, not 2019. I apologize. And then we started seeing other types of transactions, other types of Bitcoin, other types of blockchains, and they started building solutions and applications and things like that. And we'll get into some of those details here in a few minutes. And from that, while Bitcoin was the first major blockchain, there was then something called a fork. So somebody came up with an idea that said, hey, listen, we can actually put software code into the blocks. We can increase its abilities, functionality. So they did something called a fork. And so Ethereum was the first fork of Bitcoin. And today, there's many, many different types of blockchains. There's some blockchains that are more secure. There's some that are faster. There are some that use less energy, more transactions per second. There's an entire explosion of different types of blockchains. So when somebody talks to you about blockchain, automatically many people go to Bitcoin because it's kind of like the standard. But there's many, many different types of blockchains. And so one of the common criticisms about Bitcoin is there's usage. Well, there's other types of blockchains that use less energy. There's different layers of protocol, so that there's just many, many alternatives. So let's take a minute and talk about what a blockchain is. A blockchain is a growing list of records. So if you think about like a ledger book, and each page has transactions on it, right? a block essentially is like a page of ledger transactions. And each block is cryptographically connected to the previous block. Just like in a ledger book, one page is connected to the previous page. And so each block contains a hash of the previous block, a timestamp, and then the transaction data. And so blockchains are resistant to modification. Now, if somebody was going to change any of the information in one block, without getting into a lot of details, it would radically change all the information in the following blocks. And since these blocks are witnessed by people all over the world, hundreds and thousands of people witness it, it makes it virtually impossible to falsify data on a block. So going back to what Scott Sternetta and Stuart Habert were talking about, this was what they're trying to do in terms of an issue of trust. And the thing that makes blockchain different than the internet is, in the internet, if I was going to send you an email or I was going to send you a file, I'm sending you a copy, right? So after I send you the email, you have a copy and I have a copy. But in a blockchain, because what we're talking about is ledger transactions, if I send you a token, right, that token is removed from my, I'll call it account, and it's added to your account. So now you have it, I don't have it anymore. And which is what allows us to send money or cryptocurrency, because unlike the internet, which will send a copy, blockchain actually is a transference of an asset as opposed to a duplication and sending a copy. So I'm going to show you just this quick little video here. And can you guys hear the audio? Yes, no? All right, let me try it now. All right, were you able to hear the audio?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect.
Audio is not hearing, sir.
So we can't able to hear your audio, sir.
You are not able to hear it?
No, sir.
No, sir.
All right, let's see really quick if we can figure this
Yes,
out.
sir, we can hear.
Let's see. I do this. All right, how about now? So were you able to hear that?
No, sir.
All right, well, we're just gonna have to forego the video. All right, well, we'll just go without the video. All right, so let me explain a little bit about how a Bitcoin transaction works, and then we can talk a little bit more about the others. So if I want to send a Bitcoin to somebody, what I do is from my computer or my cell phone, I'm going to transmit. I'm going to essentially broadcast the transaction that Gerard is sending a Bitcoin to Dept. And then what happens is there are these miners, and the miners are essentially going to take all of these transactions and they're going to validate it. And when they validate it, they'll put it into a block and they'll send it to all of the other miners. The other miners will check to make sure that the transactions are valid. And when they do, when 51% of the network validates that the transaction is valid, then they will communicate to everybody else, okay, this is a valid transaction, and everyone will update their copy of the ledger so that everyone in the world has a duplicate copy of the ledger. If I was going to come back later and say that I didn't make that transaction, or that I have more money in my account than I should, everyone in the world would have a copy of the accurate ledger, so it would be impossible for me to falsify the record. Right, and that's the concept of a blockchain is you have everybody has a copy of the record, and so consequently, it's impossible for anybody to falsify the system. And we're going to talk a little bit about how this works. This gets a little technical, but I'm going to try to keep it. I try to keep everything at about a 5th grade level. In order to understand what a blockchain is, you have to understand something called a hash function. And a hash function is just a mathematical equation. And what this mathematical equation does is it takes any information or data you put in, and it scrambles it and puts it into a different format. And so the hash function used in Bitcoin is something called SHA-256. And basically what that means is if I take any information and I use this SHA function, this SHA-256 function, it's going to give me 256 bits of zeros or ones, bits of information, right? And it would look something like that string of characters that you see. And I'm not going to show you this video about how secure, but this is the same technology that we use for digital signatures. And so I can take a transaction, any transaction in the ledger book, and I can essentially, using the SHA-256 function, I scramble it and I put it into the ledger book. And I take all of these different ledger items and I use the SHA-256 function, and I essentially create a sort of a master record of all of those. And then what I do, and this is where the term blockchain comes in, each one of these boxes here represents a list of records, right? And then I blend all of them together, I hash them, I take a digital signature of the one here on the left, and I embed it into the one on the second one. And then what I do is I take all of those, including the hash of the previous block, and I put it into the third, and then the fourth and the fifth, so that if anybody makes a change to any of the records anywhere in the chain, it would then radically change all of the subsequent hashes. And everybody in the network would be notified that somebody had falsified or tampered the information. And so in a blockchain, what we have is we have all of the transactions in a block. We have the hash of the previous block. We have something called a nonce, right? A nonce is just an independent value that is guessed. And then all of this is hashed together. And then along with it is we have something called a transaction database. I won't get into the details of this just because of the time. I don't have time to get into this too detailed. But so that's just one concept. Then there's another concept called IOTA. This is an entirely different type of blockchain. So instead of this being linear, this type of blockchain functions in a 3-dimensional aspect. And it has no blocks, there's no miners, there's no fees, but it's a very, very rapid type of blockchain. This is typically used for the Internet of Things and lots of different devices. There's also another type of blockchain called the Lightning Network. So one of the challenges with the Bitcoin blockchain is that a block is mined every 10 minutes. And unfortunately, this is too slow for the banking and financial services sector. Visa and MasterCard handle millions of transactions a minute. Right, the Bitcoin blockchain is too slow for that. So there's other technologies that sit on top of the Bitcoin blockchain that allow these transactions to happen much faster. And then there's Hashgraph, which is another technology where instead of having one blockchain, there's a series of different pathways. And again, these are ways to speed it up. So it's important to understand that while a lot of people talk about Bitcoin as blockchain, there's a lot of alternatives to it. Directed acyclic graph is another one where it's not just purely linear. There's many different sort of pathways. Now, what's really important to understand, while we may think of Bitcoin when we think of blockchain, we can put any kind of digital asset onto a ledger. And that could be a video, audio recording, stocks, bonds, certificates of ownership, licensing permits, educational credentials, anything that can be made digital, right, which represents value, can be put into a blockchain. So let's talk a little bit about how blockchains are being used. These are just some of the areas where we're going to cover, right? Asset management, land titling, healthcare. But we'll just get into all of these. So, you know, one of the problems around the world is, especially in third world countries, if you know, I could go into a property office and somebody could say, you know, that farm that's been in your family for generations. Well, we're just going to scratch off your name and I'm going to put my family's name on there, right? What blockchain does is it allows us to take land titles, put it onto a digital record, and from that point forward, that land record can't be falsified. And this is being used in many places around the world, Dubai, Estonia, Sweden, throughout the world. This is happening. Cook County, Israel. There's I agree as the International Blockchain Real Estate Association. It's happening in India as well. This is one of the use cases for blockchain. Asset management. In fact, so if you think about any kind of well, here let me give you a better example. The U.S. Department of Treasury basically put their cell phones, computers. They basically put the registration numbers. They turn them into a hash, and they're now using this to manage the assets in the U.S. Department of Treasury. In acquisition management, the U.S. Health and Human Services Department, they had $26 billion in annual spending across 100,000 different contracts. What they did in their project is they consolidated 5 different contract writing systems. They used machine learning to cleanse the data, find and correct bad errors, and they literally saved millions and millions of dollars, because what they were able to do is consolidate all of this data together in such a way that the different teams and departments and contractors could write data to a blockchain and only see the data that related to them, yet not have to share it with competitors. And then they put microservices on top of that, which allowed the government to be able to find the best business contracts, and it literally saved them millions of dollars. In the area of banking, there's at least 40 central banks around the world that are developing what's referred to as central bank digital currency. There's a lot of controversy in this. The governments like it because it gives the governments a great deal of control. A lot of folks in the more libertarian spaces, they're not that crazy about it, but it does allow banking services to become much more streamlined, much more efficient. It allows for cross-border payments. It's a technology that's rapidly being expanded throughout the banking sector. Now, cybersecurity is an interesting use case for blockchain, and let me explain why. In the old paradigm of cybersecurity, if we want to keep something protected, what we do is we put it in a vault, in a storage place. We build these big walls around it, and we don't let anybody in. The only way you can get in is if you have a need to know. But the concept behind blockchain and consensus witnessing is you let everybody see it, so that if anybody attempts to falsify data or steal it or do anything that they shouldn't do, everybody is aware of it. So it's an entirely different paradigm on cybersecurity. And again, we've got lots of resources to explore this further. I'm flying at a fairly high level just to give you a high level understanding of all this. And what we've actually seen in the past is when there have been data breaches, those data breaches have been very costly, because if somebody gets into one place, they now have access to all the records. But in a decentralized cybersecurity environment, if they broke into one place, they might get one person's record. They might actually get only part of one person's record because all of the data is decentralized. So many of these attacks, right, with hundreds and millions of dollars stole from a central location, in a blockchain-based environment, that would be very, very difficult to do. Defense and supply chain. So here's a very interesting example. So aircraft carriers, they have to do, in the Navy, they have to do maintenance on the planes, right? The problem is if they need a part, it's very difficult to get a part to an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. So what do? They actually 3D print the part. Where did they get the drawings from? They get it from the internet. And there have been cases where people have hacked the internet, got access to these drawings, and installed micro cracks or micro deviations. So the part looks fine, but it's designed to essentially fail under pressure. And if those parts were secured on the blockchain, then any alteration or tampering of that design would essentially notify all of the parties that the design had been tampered with. In the energy of retail, one of the things that's really fascinating about energy and the use of blockchain is, and this has happened a lot in Africa and other places where the infrastructure is it's not as mature, right? So just like a lot of these places, they leapfrogged with cell phones. They're coming up with sort of these decentralized methods or models where people are creating their own energy and they're selling it to each other. They're tokenizing the energy and they're selling it to each other, creating entirely new energy markets. And this is creating new opportunities to fund projects and actually to have smart energy grids. It's a fascinating field. This is I love this analogy, intellectual property or this use case. So there's all kinds of different intellectual property, right? Inventions, artistic works, scientific findings. They all have different sort of parameters and criteria. But remember what we said, you can take any digital asset, any digital information, you can take a hash of it and you can put it in a block. And then at that point, there's another block mined 10 minutes after that, there's another block mined 10 minutes after that. And so at any point in time, you can point back to any block in history and you can say, oh, you see this book? Well, here's a hash. I put a hash in it and I put it on this block at 3:30 p.m. in 2018, July 30th. And now there's a date timestamp proof that digital asset was put there. And so you can put your name, you can put a picture of yourself, you can do whatever you want to, but you can now verify that that's there. Right? Law enforcement, one of the things that's really fascinating is since transactions essentially are visible, now they might be hashed. This gives law enforcement a great opportunity to be able to see transaction history and help enforce laws. It also helps with things like human trafficking and lots and lots of different use cases. In the area of healthcare, right? Blockchain is being used for clinical trials. And so I'll just give you an example. One of the, in clinical trials, there's consent management, there's there's privacy, who owns the data. Blockchain is providing just all kinds of resources in that. With respect to public health, the same types of things. There's data that's being collected by hospitals, by schools, by law enforcement, by public clinics. All of that data can be collected and managed in such a way that it maintains everybody's privacy right. Drug supply chains, this is a huge, huge problem. It's unfortunate how many people are taking cancer meds. Unfortunately, those cancer meds have been tampered with and they're actually taking sugar pills thinking that they're cancer meds. It is a multi-billion-dollar problem. And and we'll talk about supply chain in a minute, but insurance claims, administrative processes, all of the, in healthcare, there's just a tremendous amount of use, and especially using AI now to help analyze data primarily for clinical trials and public health perspective. Identity management is one of the most fascinating use cases. It's applicable to all other use cases, and it applies to both individuals and organizations. And it addresses the issue of identity versus persona. So identity is all of the things that make up who I am. And so, but what persona is when I'm going to involve myself in a transaction. So, for example, if I want to Uber with somebody, right? What do I need to know about the driver? Right? Probably the type of car, the license plate, maybe a photograph of the driver, right? I really don't need to know. I don't need to know necessarily their name, where they live, how much money they make, things like that, right? The persona is just the information that I need to engage with somebody in a transaction or a relationship, right? Whereas identity are all the things that make up an identity. So identity can be defined by vital records, right? Birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates. Biometric data can make up my identity. Geographic information, where have I lived over time? Educational criteria, family history, work history, financial history. All of this makes up my identity. But I don't have to disclose all of this information when I'm engaging with a business or transaction. So, for example, if I want to purchase something, in many places you have to be a certain age in order to purchase alcohol. Do they need to know my birthday? Do they need to know my address? Do they need to know all that? No. All they really need to know is, do I meet the criteria? Am I over 18 or 21 or whatever the criteria is? I just love this picture. It just shows all the different aspects of identity. So it's similar to this last picture, but I just like the way it looks. And so what happens right now is all kinds of data is being generated by users, and it's collected by companies like Google and Facebook, different retail stores. It's sold to data miners, and then they resell it, and then they sell it back to the advertisers, right? And so if we hosted digital identities on the blockchain, that would give individual users the power over who has access to their personal data. It would also allow individuals to capitalize and monetize their data, because right now, there's an old saying that if you don't pay for the product, you are the product. And so blockchain blockchain-based identity management would allow for greater transparency in the collection and the use of personal data. I'm working with the United Nations right now to develop blockchain-based identity standards. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is making it so that if anybody accesses your identity, then you need to be notified that somebody has accessed your identity, as opposed to the way it happens that right now, everything's kind of in a black box. So now, supply chain system, this is a phenomenal use for blockchain, because in most supply chains, there's a very large number of stakeholders with varying levels of technology, many different dependent processes. There's cascading risks. Each organization has a separate system. There's proprietary data and lots of manual interfaces, right? And if we look at the global food supply, this is just an example of an extremely complex supply chain system. So just as an example, Walmart did a trial, and they have many, many different vendors. So the vice president of supply chain, basically, I think it was an avocado. He said he handed us an avocado. He said, I want you to tell me where we got this from, when did we get it, when did it leave the farm or the source. It took them 6 days, 18 hours, and 26 minutes. They then put together a blockchain solution where all of the vendors were connected through a blockchain solution, and they all were able to, again, from a peer-to-peer perspective, interoperate. And then the next time they did the experiments, it happened within 2 seconds. So imagine in the breakout of the E. coli or salmonella, right? The difference between 2 seconds and 6 days could really save lives. It also helps with fraud prevention. It's much more granular. There's real-time records. It identifies and resolves bottlenecks in real time. And then it mitigates regulatory and compliance issues and reduce the cost of storage, fines, penalties, fees, and interest. So it's just much more efficient. Here's just one example. This is just flowers, right? It's a $105 billion industry. It typically takes 30 days for flowers to essentially move through the supply chain. It requires 30 unique signatures. It requires over 200 different communications. And if you have one lost record in that process, it essentially derails a shipment. And this is, again, just another example of how blockchain can streamline all of those processes in the area of supply chain. Supply chains also allow for the use of something called smart contracts. And a smart contract, so one of the things that's really interesting is you can take software code and you can actually embed it into the token or the asset. And so let me just give you an example. I can give my son an allowance, but I can tell my son, if the teachers at your school put grades in the grade book that are below what we agree, then some or all of that money comes back to me. I can actually program it in the money. Or if I'm going to buy an airline ticket, I'm going to buy this airline ticket, but if the flight is later delayed, some or all of that money comes back to me, right? Or I'm a government, I'm going to give money for food or clothing or housing or whatever. I can actually direct the money. And so I can set the conditions. And so in a supply chain, I can set conditions that when something passes inspection, right, a certain amount of money is released. When it gets loaded onto the ship, a certain amount of money is released, right? When it goes through the border, a certain amount of taxes and fees and you know, the insurance part is activated. There was one insurance company that was insuring ships, and what they were doing is they were using GPS data to identify real-time locations of the ships. So when the ships traveled around the coast, around the south of Africa, in places where there was heavy pirate activity, their insurance rates would go up, allowing the captains of the ship to be able to minimize or have better control over what their costs were going to be, because their route, you know, in terms of what the timing was and how much risk they were going to take, actually reflected directly in the insurance. So smart contracts are it's an interesting aspect of blockchain. In fact, I'll take it one even a little bit further. You can, if you think of any business or organization, a business organization is a collection of business processes, right? And a smart contract is a business process. Well, you can take smart contracts and build them on top of each other and actually create an organization. And you can create an entire organization made out of smart contracts. It's called a distributed autonomous organization. And it is literally an organization that has no people. It has no directors, right? It has no mandate. It has no employee. And so those are some interesting things. And then here's the last thing.
Audio on mute, please.
If you can mute yourself, that would be awesome. Then the last example I want to use is voting. So I'm not sure if it in the countries where you are.
என்ன பண்றது?
Sir, please unmute your audio, sir. Mr. Dache?
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, so here's how voting would work on blockchain. This is the last use case. Imagine that we would take our vote, we would write it on a piece of paper, and we would all put it up on the wall. And then everyone could look at all of the votes, and we could count the votes together. And nobody would be able to dispute who won an election, because all of our votes would be written to a blockchain, and everybody could read the votes. Now, there's a lot of complexity in election law. I don't have time to get into all of that right now, but conceptually, that's the future that blockchain holds. So imagine living in a world where our transactions, our interactions with government, our interactions with each other could be trusted, where the incidents for fraud are greatly reduced, and it creates a world where we could just trust one another. And that's really the future of blockchain. So with the Government Blockchain Association, we're working with industries and governments to find out how can we live in a world where we have more trust with one another, that hopefully would lead to better prosperity and peace. All right. And so I leave you with, here are some resources. The last slide of my presentation is a QR code. The gbaglobal.org is a resource with lots of stuff. We got videos. We have over 50 working groups. We've got standards. And then here's a link to the work we're doing with the United Nations. So with that, there's a QR code. And hopefully I didn't go too long, but I wanted to give you that information. So thank you very much.
Anita.
Participants, you can ask your queries. Any questions you have?
It was kind of like drinking from a fire hose. Yeah, so this QR code essentially is a link to the presentation. Let me just make sure.
Okay.
I'm gonna save it just to make sure it's completely current. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So if you hit that QR code now, that should be a link to the entire presentation.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening speech in the area of blockchain.
I'll do one more thing. I'll put my email address here. If anybody has any questions. But I would also invite all of you to join the Government Blockchain Association. We've got thousands of members all over the world, and the idea is to help them connect, communicate, and collaborate.
Yes, sir, we'll do that, sir. Any queries, participants? Any queries you can ask Mr. Gerard. So sir has posted his email ID, so you can ask him very well. Mr. Gerard, can we close? Can we go for vote of thanks?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Thank you very much, sir. For
Vote of thanks. Can we close it?
Gerard, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I very thank you for accepting, and we are happy that you have briefed very neatly about the blockchain technology. I hope the faculty members also will be happy. Thank you, sir.
You bet. And again, please feel free to have your faculty members go to the gbaglobal.org website. There's a tremendous amount of resources they can look at.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So we'll go for a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Dache, for your enlightening speech in the area of blockchain. Now I request Mrs. M. Kalaivani, Assistant Professor, PG Department of Information Technology and BCA, to deliver the vote of thanks.
A warm and grateful morning to one and all present here. This is Kalaivani, Assistant Professor from PG Department of Information Technology and BCA, Dwarakadas Govardhan Das Vaishnav College. On behalf of PG Department of Information Technology and BCA, it's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks to all those who have helped us in making the first day of 1 week International Faculty Development Program a grand success. First, I would like to thank our chief guest, Mr. Gerard Dache, Executive Director, the Government Blockchain Association, United States of America, for sharing your knowledge with us in spite of your busy schedule to grace the occasion. Thank you, sir. Your thoughts have enlightened our minds and have shown us a new path. This informative session covered many arenas, especially what is a blockchain, how does a blockchain work in cryptocurrency, blockchain in diverse domains, particularly the use of hash functions in blockchain that are really useful for research scholars and the students fraternity. I am really sure that this session's outcome will be a lesson on our minds forever. I would like to express our sincere thanks to Honorable Secretary Shri Ashok Kumar Mundra sir and the respected Principal Dr. S. Santosh Babu sir for enthusiastic support. I would also like to thank our respected Head of the Department, Dr. K. Angekani ma'am, for her guidance and moral support. I wish to express my sincere thanks to all the participants present in this session. I am very happy to express the vote of thanks to our staff, coordinators, volunteers for making the first day International Faculty Development Program a grand success through their motivation and dedication. Thank you one and all. Have a great day.
Thank you, ma'am. Participants, kindly fill the feedback form which is posted in the chat box.
Participants, the feedback link will also be posted in the WhatsApp group also, FDP WhatsApp group.